Good afternoon. Good afternoon. If you're just coming in, take a seat, get comfortable. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eve Stern, Director of the Center for the Humanities, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our Spring Humanities Festival. This year's festival marks an exciting milestone, the 30th anniversary of URI Center for the Humanities, and also caps off our wonderful year-long series, Innovations in Storytelling. I hope you'll help yourself to a 30th birthday cupcake or other treats at the back of the room, either during or after the talk. I'm thrilled and honored to welcome Ruth Ozeki, novelist, filmmaker, and Zen Buddhist priest, to URI this afternoon. And I'd like to thank the College of Arts and Sciences, the Office of the Provost, and the Office of the President for generously sponsoring this event. As you'll see from the program, and if you didn't get a program, they are up at the front of the room there. Our festivities today will begin with some opening remarks and presentation of Student Excellence Awards, followed by Professor Ozeki's talk, after which we'll have some time for questions from the audience, and if you're watching on the live stream, please type your questions into the chat. As many of you know, the College of Arts and Sciences generously purchased 100 copies of Professor Ozeki's latest book, The Book of Form and Emptiness, for a campus-wide big read. As I think you all noticed, we had a few copies left over, and it looks like most of them have been claimed, but there might be a couple of others up there, and our speaker will be happy to sign books after the talk if you have a copy. I read the book and I absolutely love it, so I highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. And now I'd like to welcome Provost Barbara Wolf for some opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone today, and thank you for joining us for this exciting event. And this is particularly exciting because this year, as was noted, marks the 30th anniversary of URI Center for the Humanities. The center is a vital hub for a dynamic, accessible, interdisciplinary programming for URI students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of our community. The center, through its programming, ranging from monthly brown bag talks featuring URI researchers to a yearly series that brings in scholars and artists from across the nation, the center creates a community for people interested in humanistic questions and builds bridges between the humanities and other disciplines. This year, the center hosted a year-long series of lectures and events on innovations in storytelling, an endeavor at the heart of humanities. This exciting series featured historians, novelists, cartoonists, anthropologists, musicians, artists, and other practitioners discussing the craft of storytelling. I hope folks have had a chance to take on and in many of these events in the series and to learn from the incredible scholars and artists who have been featured. In addition to hosting events, the center also facilitates new ideas and innovation by supporting faculty and students, their research, with small grants that are awarded twice a year. We know these grants can and do make a difference, a substantial difference, for our humanities students and scholars who do receive them. The humanities, from English and languages to history and philosophy, play a vital role in helping URI students conceptualize the world and develop research, writing, and critical thinking skills. The humanities are central to the student formation that goes on our university campus. This contributes significantly to URI fulfilling its mission as a Rhode Island flagship public research university. Thank you again for joining us today at this event, and again, congratulations to 30 years of the Center of Humanities, and I would like to invite Thomas Stubblefield, Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences, to come up and present the Humanities Student Excellence Awards. Thomas.
Good afternoon, everyone. This year, we're very pleased to recognize 3 outstanding students who have made substantial contributions to the humanities, both on and off campus, and show great promise in humanities careers. So I'd like to ask the students and their faculty sponsors to come up and pose for a photo one by one as I briefly announce the awards, and I encourage the audience to read more about their work in the programs. The first undergraduate award goes to Frost Infante, the quintessential humanities student who has managed, and this is truly extraordinary, to earn a perfect GPA while quadruple majoring, first time I've ever seen that, in art history, English, history, and Italian. Frost, who has already made a substantial public humanities contribution, intends to pursue a career as a museum curator. Please join me in congratulating Frost and their faculty sponsor, Professor Hillary Emerson. Do you want to come up in front here? The second undergraduate award goes to Taylor Moss, who received her BA in art history in December. Taylor has already contributed substantially to the humanities on and off campus through her publications, podcast, and curatorial work. Congratulations to Taylor and her faculty sponsor, Professor Aaron McCutcheon. Our graduate award goes to Aidan Barlow Dimer, who will receive her MA in History in the History, Archaeology, and Anthropology track this May. Aidan's research is on the human condition in maritime cultures, and her public humanities work has taken her from Alaska to Israel to Woods Hole. Please join me in congratulating Aidan and her faculty sponsors, Professor Joel Rollo-Coster and Rod Mather. Now I'd like to welcome Soo Young Kim, a doctoral candidate in English, who will introduce our speaker.
Hello, my name is Sue, and I am a time being. As such, I am honored and delighted to introduce to you Ruth Ozeki, whose extraordinary work has enriched the literary landscape and captivated audiences around the world. Ruth Ozeki's first two novels, My Year of Meats, published in 1998, followed by All Over Creation in 2003, were both recognized in New York Times notable books. Ruth's 2013 novel, A Tale for the Time Being, was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and also won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. This novel, one of my favorites, introduced to me by my advisor, Christine Mock, who's here today, has been translated into 28 languages and sold in 31 territories. She has also written a memoir titled The Face, A Time Code. Ozeki spoke about the writing process of this work during an interview at the Jaipur Literature Festival in India. The deadline for the work was approaching, and she really did not want to write this essay. However, as a Zen Buddhist practitioner, Ozeki understood that she must sit down and meditate on the object that was causing her so much grief. This resulted in sitting in front of the mirror for 3 hours, observing her face and noting new observations that surfaced during this time. Ozeki's most recent work is The Book of Form and Emptiness, which was awarded the prestigious Women's Prize for Fiction in 2022, an award given to female English language writers from around the world, where previous winners include Zadie Smith and Tayari Jones. Ozeki is also an independent filmmaker and directed the award-winning documentary Halving the Bones and the film Body of Correspondence, singular. Ozeki is an ordained Zen Buddhist priest and practitioner. She splits her time between Whaletown, British Columbia, New York City, and Northampton, Massachusetts, where she is a professor emerita of English Language and Literature, and Grace Draco Ross Professor of Humanities at Smith College. Some interesting facts about Ruth Ozeki and her work. The library that features prominently in her new novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness, is based on the Vancouver Public Library and the Seattle Central Library designed by Rem Koolhaas. The first novels Ozeki wrote, two novels that Ozeki wrote were researched in these libraries. Like Benny O, the teenage protagonist in Ozeki's latest novel, Ozeki is also biracial. She was born in Connecticut to a linguist mother from Japan and Hawaii, and a white father who was a professor of anthropology. She jokes that when she was growing up, that she was half Japanese and half anthropologist, and that one side was always studying the other. Ozeki has expressed that it was difficult growing up in the 60s and 70s as a mixed-race child in New Haven, and like now in Ozeki's novel, A Tale for the Time Being, Ozeki experienced bullying. Ruth Ozeki is a pseudonym with an interesting history. The last name Ozeki is taken from an ex-boyfriend. They parted ways, but years later, she adopted his last name as a pen name. Ozeki has noted that there has been a certain sense of freedom writing under a pen name. After graduating from Smith, Ozeki received a Japanese Ministry of Education fellowship to do research in classical Japanese literature. In Japan, she also studied no drama and mask carving while establishing a language school and teaching at Kyoto Sangyo University. Ozeki writes with an exceptional freedom and a childlike curiosity that has not been lost or tainted over the years. It's the kind of freedom and curiosity that allows artists to take flight without being self-conscious. If artists are known for their unique perspectives, when considering Ozeki's personal history and experiences, it makes sense that Ozeki's works are extraordinarily and organically innovative, colored by a rare, refreshing take on the world. Her films and novels are open to inquiries. They're full of wonder, heartbreak, humor, possibilities, and tragedies, including vivid portrayals of imminent and immediate experiences in our real world, such as the Japanese tsunami of 2011. For example, A Tale of the Time Being includes characters named Ruth and Oliver. As a literary scholar and creative writer, I must emphasize that this is not the actual Ruth and her partner Olive, but fictional personae that is nonetheless self-referential. Ruth and Oliver interact with a teenager named Nao in Japan, whose journal has drifted ashore in British Columbia after the tsunami. The depiction of the tsunami, the way different points in time overlap, the compelling ways that technology connects strangers to one another, all of this feels so real. I remember reading this book during the pandemic and being captivated. The boundaries between reality and fiction blurred in ways that I've yet to experience. And within this convergence, my own life seemed to be interwoven into the pages of the book. Finally, in her most recent novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness, the narrator is none other than a book. Yes, the book has its own voice in this text. Benny is the protagonist of the novel. He is a young teenage boy who loses his father and starts hearing voices. Voices of different objects from his daily life, such as windows, toys, scissors, clocks, chopsticks, flannel shirts, and rubber ducks. These voices are silenced only when he is reading a book. And the narrative itself is sort of a conversation that Benny has with this book. I would like to end my introduction with a beautiful passage from Ozeki's last novel on the experience of reading, a depiction that mirrors the profound experience of reading Ozeki's work as well. Soon, he discovered that when he was reading to himself, all the other voices in his head grew quiet and still. As he walked down the sidewalk and waited at the bus stop, he felt like he was buffered from the world, safe inside a comforting cocoon of quiet story that the books had spun around him. And even all the screaming from the store windows and the billboards didn't disturb him. When he boarded the bus, he sat with his forehead pressed against the window and watched the darkening streets float by in the dusky light. The world felt muted, submerged. Speaking on behalf of the community at the University of Rhode Island, we are thrilled to welcome Ruth Ozeki, a formidable figure in contemporary letters.
Wow. Now, who was that you just talked to? No, it's funny to hear these stories about myself. And it does make me wonder. I mean, they're true-ish, you know. No, they're true. The boyfriend, he was great. There was nothing wrong with Hiroshi Ozeki, right? And in fact, he ended up owning and running a major import-export business, and had properties all over Shinjuku, right? Stores and real estate all over Shinjuku. I probably should not have broken up with him, you know, when I think about it. But anyway, um, I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled to be here. This, in particular, just because this is a celebration of the humanities. And, I really feel like the humanities have never been more important to our world, to maybe the planet, and certainly to our survival as humans, as a species on this planet. The deep and serious study of the humanities reminds us of the best that humans can do, even though every day we are inundated with news of the worst. So to be here at the University of Rhode Island, where there's a center for the humanities is really astonishing, and it's very, very heartening. Every college and every university needs a humanities festival, and every college and university needs a center for the humanities to host it. So I'm thrilled to be here. And thank you for joining me. And congratulations to the winners of the awards. This was this was really great. I'm so happy to be a part of your celebration as well. Yeah. Um, so today I'm going to talk about my recent novel about the Book of Form and Emptiness, and I'd like to read a little bit from the book. And most of all, though, because this is billed as a conversation with Ruth Ozeki, I'd like to I'd like to have that conversation. If there's anything that you want to bring up, think about it, and we'll make sure at the end to leave time for that dialogue. It's really nice to be invited to give a talk like this, because it's an occasion for me to think about my work from a different angle, or a different perspective. Usually when I'm in the middle of writing a novel, I burrow down so deep inside it, I just can't kind of see over the edge. I get completely wrapped up in the problems of my characters and plot and their lives and all of that. But when I have a chance like this to talk about the body of work, I can step back and kind of get a broader, almost like an aerial view, of the kinds of storytelling habits, I guess, that I've developed over the years. And I start to notice things like, the voices and multiple points of view and, the narrative structures that I unconsciously seem to prefer, as well as the kinds of themes that I seem drawn to write about. All the stuff that I learned to do about, to learn to kind of pay attention to in other people's work when I was an English major. I can suddenly kind of turn and put on that hat and look at my work this way too. And in doing so, I noticed that certain patterns start to emerge. One of the things I've noticed is that I seem to write novels in pairs. My first two novels, My Year of Meat and All Over Creation, were about food. My Year of Meats is obviously about meat. It's about Jane Takagi Little, a documentary filmmaker who gets a job producing a madcap reality TV show. And it's about Akiko Ueno, a beleaguered Japanese housewife who's married to Jane's boss, who's the ad agency executive, whose clients are sponsoring this show. So I have to confess that Jane's story is somewhat autobiographical. Before I started writing novels, I used to work in commercial film and television production, and I had a job, much like Jane's, coordinating and producing TV shows. Before that, I used to work as an art director on low budget horror films, but that's a whole other story. And if anybody's curious about that, we can talk about that later. Um, so My Year of Meats is based on a real life TV series that my coworkers and I conceived and later produced for Japanese TV. And here too, I have to confess that my coworkers and I had a bit of an agenda. We had a bit of a feminist agenda. This was in the 1980s, and opportunities for women in Japan were still extremely limited. And so we thought it would be inspiring to make a documentary series profiling racially and culturally diverse American women with interesting jobs and unusual families, living rich and fulfilling lives. Our mission, in other words, was to foment an anarcho-feminist insurrection amongst our Japanese housewife viewership, or something like that. It was the 1980s, right? We were young. Um, you can imagine how thrilled we were when we got a call from our Japanese producer telling us that he'd found a sponsor for our show. The show had been greenlit, right? The feminist revolution was underway. And then you can imagine how dismayed we were to learn that the sponsor of our show was the U.S. Meat Export Federation, a very powerful lobby group for the American meat industry. Now, so the good folks at the U.S. Meat Export Federation were not feminists. They were not interested in an anarcho-feminist revolution. They just wanted to sell meat. They agreed to sponsor us, but only on the condition that we turn our radical and righteous documentary series into a madcap reality cooking show called Mrs. America, featuring the lifestyles of attractive American wives and their attractive homes and their attractive families, and most importantly, their attractive and mouthwatering recipes for beef. Okay. So this was an interesting and important lesson in storytelling. My coworkers and I wanted to tell one kind of story, but ultimately our story was hijacked by the corporate sponsor's interests, and it became a very different kind of story. We did manage to get our subversive digs in using a kind of Trojan horse strategy, and we were proud of that. We convinced ourselves that we were doing a good thing, and maybe we were, it's hard to know. In any case, I produced the show for 2 years. During that time, I became very aware of how commercial sponsorship manipulates what people perceive to be real and authentic. The show purported to be a documentary, fact-based documentary, but it was really propaganda. We used to call it meat porn. So My Year of Meats was my attempt to understand what had happened, right? Understand what had happened and how, this transformation took place. And if you want to learn more about this topic, you can read the novel. So all of her creation is about potatoes, right? And that seemed like a logical move, right? From meat to potatoes. The novel is about a prodigal daughter who returns home after many years to her potato farming community in Idaho to see her father, who is dying. So the novel is about the loss of small American family farms to large multinational agribusiness. And this part is somewhat autobiographical too, because this is a story that I grew up with. My American grandparents were dairy farmers in Wisconsin. And they lost their family farm to a large dairy conglomerate during the Great Depression. And this was something that my father, who ended up being teaching anthropology at Yale, he never got over this because what he really wanted was to be a farmer. The novel is also about the public relations efforts to market a new line of genetically engineered potatoes to American farmers, and also consumers. So, like My Year of Meats, it's also about the way that commerce and commercial sponsorship shapes and distorts our perception of reality, right? And in this case, the genetic reality of a potato. So, one book kind of grew out of the other. Right. Both novels arose from my questions and ethical concerns about food and commerce and media representation and biotech and environmental sustainability. But they grew out of in kind of dialogue with each other. My next two novels, A Tale for the Time Being and The Book of Form and Emptiness, also form a pair. I think of the two books as siblings, maybe cousins. Both books are about young people struggling with mental illness, mental health issues. Both books are inspired and very deeply inspired, I think, by Zen Buddhist philosophy. Both books have Zen nuns in them, which I think makes them kind of unique, right? Both books raise questions and concerns about the environment. Both are about reading and writing and the power of storytelling. And like the first pair of books, this pair is also about the ways in which we represent and understand reality. What is real and how do we know? And then once again here, the Book of Form and Emptiness kind of grew out or grew from A Tale for the Time Being. So it's like these pairs of novels are in conversation with each other. You know, I finished writing one and I'm still interested in the questions it raised, and I feel like there's more to explore. Or actually most frequently I feel some remorse about some aspect of the first novel that I didn't quite get right or neglected somehow. And so I feel like I need to write the second. Um, Writers are often asked, you know, where the idea for a book comes from. And I never know how to answer this question because it's never just one thing. It's more like a kind of constellation of, you know, random factors that come together. Sometimes it's a Buddhist text that I'm studying, or a cookbook that I've picked up on the sidewalk outside of a used bookstore, or a link to a website about Japanese maid cafes or crows. Sometimes it's a personal experience or a traumatic event that I'm still struggling with. Sometimes it's an ethical question about livelihood, or an existential question about reality, or just a question that somebody asks me after a book talk. Um, it can be something very small, like a Chinese fortune cookie, or a snow globe that a friend gave me after she came back from the Bahamas. And often, as I said, it's something that I regret. You know, remorse is a great seed to grow a novel from. I highly recommend remorse for for any aspiring writers in the group. You know, really cultivate remorse. It gives you so much to work with. And I've had a lot of remorse in my life, and I'm really glad about that. Um, Sometimes it's just a dream that I've had. I mean, many different things. And so these random elements kind of come together and they start to constellate. And then from this constellation, the novel starts to speak. And I say speak because novels often come to me as voices. You know, sometimes it's the voice of a character, sometimes it's the voice of the book itself. In April of 2012, I was writing in my process journal, and this is something else that we can talk about later if you're interested. I was writing in my process journal, and this voice kind of came into my head and said, a book must start somewhere. Right. Now, I think I was struggling with writer's block. I couldn't get started, right? And so, you know, a book must start somewhere. Well, this is obvious, right? It's obvious that a book must start somewhere. But there was something about the serious tone of this sentence and of this voice that made me pay attention and write it down. And here's another tip for any emerging writers in the room. You know, when a character or a book or a poem deigns to speak to you, you must immediately stop whatever you're doing, right? Put down your cell phone and write down what it is that they're saying. Otherwise, they'll go find another writer to talk to, you know, somebody who's actually paying attention and not scrolling through TikTok. or in my case, playing Sudoku on their phone. Um, because I am a professional writer, I make it a point of sitting at my desk for a fixed number of hours a day. And most days, not much happens. I just kind of sit there moving commas around. And do I know you? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I suddenly had a moment. You look just like a student of mine. Oh, anyway, hi. Nice to meet you. Yeah. I anyway, I sit at my desk just kind of moving commas around, and I like to call that research. But if and when, a voice comes, then I'm ready, and I'm ready to write it down. So when I heard this sentence, right, a book must start somewhere, I wrote it down, and because I was sitting at my desk paying attention, the voice continued to speak. And this was the beginning of the Book of Form and Emptiness. And because it's a book about voices and about voice hearing, I'd like to read the first couple of pages for you, so you can hear the voices the way that I heard them, and you can get a kind of sense of the tone of the book. Is that okay? Do you guys like being read to? Is that okay? Good, good. I love reading aloud. And I also love being read to. It always makes me feel like a kid again, right? So just, snuggle in, pretend you're in your pajamas, and I'll just read a little bit from the beginning. In the beginning. A book must start somewhere. One brave letter must volunteer to go first, laying itself on the line in an act of faith from which a word takes heart and follows, drawing a sentence into its wake. From there, a paragraph amasses, and soon a page, and the book is on its way, finding a voice, calling itself into being. A book must start somewhere, and this one starts here. A boy. Shh, listen. That's my book, and it's talking to you. Can you hear it? It's okay if you can't, though. It's not your fault. Things speak all the time, but if your ears aren't attuned, you have to learn to listen. You can start by using your eyes, because eyes are easy. Look at all the things around you. What do you see? A book, obviously, and obviously the book is speaking to you, so try something more challenging. The chair you're sitting on, the pencil in your pocket, the sneaker on your foot. Still can't hear? Then get down on your knees and put your head to the seat, or take off your shoe and hold it to your ear. No, wait, if there are people around, they'll think you're mad, so try it with the pencil first. Pencils have stories inside them, and they're safe as long as you don't stick the point in your ear. Just hold it next to your head and listen. Can you hear the wood whisper? The ghost of the pine, the mutter of lead. Sometimes it's more than one voice. Sometimes it's a whole chorus of voices rising from a single thing, especially if it's a made thing with lots of different makers. But don't be scared. I think it depends on the kind of day they were having back in Guangdong or Laos or wherever, and if it was a good day at the old sweatshop, if they were enjoying a pleasant thought at the moment when that particular grommet came tumbling down the line and passed through their fingers, then that pleasant thought will cling to the whole. Sometimes it's not so much a thought as a feeling, a nice warm feeling, like love, for example, sunny and yellow. But when it's a sad feeling, or an angry one that gets laced into your shoe, then you better watch out, because that shoe might do crazy shit, like marching your feet right up to the front of the Nike store, for example, where you could wind up smashing the display window with a baseball bat made of furious wood. If that happens, it's still not your fault. Just apologize to the window, say I'm sorry to the glass, and whatever you do, don't try to explain. The arresting officer doesn't care about the crappy conditions in the bat factory. He won't care about the chainsaws or the sturdy ash tree that the bat used to be. So just keep your mouth shut. Stay calm. Be polite. Remember to breathe. It's really important not to get upset, because then the voices will get the upper hand and take over your mind. Things are needy. They take up space. They want attention, and they'll drive you mad if you let them. So just remember, you're like the air traffic controller. No, wait, you're like the leader of a big brass band made up of all the jazzy stuff of the planet, and you're floating out there in space, standing on this great garbage heap of a world with your hair slicked back and your natty suit and your stick up in the air, surrounded by all the eager things. And for one quick, beautiful moment, all their voices go silent, waiting till you bring your baton down. Music or madness? It's totally up to you. The book. So, start with the voices then. When did he first hear them? When he was still little? Benny was always a small boy and slow to develop, as though his cells were reluctant to multiply and take up space in the world. It seems he pretty much stopped growing when he turned 12, the same year his father died, and his mother started putting on weight. The change was subtle, but Benny seemed to shrink as Annabelle grew, as if she were metabolizing her small son's grief, along with her own. Yes, that seems right. So perhaps the voices started around then too, shortly after Kenny died? It was a car accident that killed him. No, it was a truck. Kenny O was a jazz clarinetist, but his real name was Kenji, so we'll call him that. He played swing mostly, big band stuff at weddings and bar mitzvahs and in campy downtown hipster clubs where the dudes all wore beards and pork pie hats and checkered shirts and mothy tweed jackets from the Salvation Army. He'd been playing a gig, and afterwards he went out drinking or drugging or whatever he did with his musician friends, just a little toot. But enough so that on his way home, when he stumbled and fell in the alley, he didn't see the necessity of getting up right away. He wasn't far from home, only a few yards from the rickety gate that led to the back of his house. If he'd managed to crawl a bit further, he would have been okay. But instead, he just lay there on his back, in a dim pool of light cast by the street lamp above the Gospel Mission thrift shop dumpster. The long chill of winter had begun to lift, and a spring mist hung in the alleyway. He lay there, gazing up at the light and the tiny particles of moisture that swarmed brightly in the air. He was drunk, or high, or both. The light was beautiful. Earlier in the evening, he'd had a fight with his wife. And maybe he was feeling sorry. Maybe in his mind he was vowing to be better. Who knows what he was doing? Maybe he fell asleep. Let's hope so. In any case, that's where he was still lying an hour or so later when the delivery truck came rattling down the alleyway. I think I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you. So it's not really a spoiler to tell you that Kenji dies. Right. The Book of Form and Emptiness begins with a death, which seems like an appropriate way to start a Buddhistically inflected novel with a title like this. Death is the movement from form into formlessness or emptiness. Death is a mark of impermanence, which in Buddhism is one of the three marks of existence, right? The three innate characteristics of reality. And what is real? Impermanence is real. And death is a cause of suffering, which is the Buddha's first noble truth and the second of the three marks of existence, right? Human beings are impermanent. We die and we don't like that, and so we suffer. Now, I know you're dying to hear the third mark of existence, but you'll just have to wait for that. In storytelling terms, the death of Benny's father, Kenji, is what's called the precipitating incident, the event, in this case a traumatic one, that disrupts the status quo and sets the novel in motion. And in my life too, the death of my father was a kind of precipitating incident, and it was certainly a traumatic event. And it was the incident that led to my interest in Buddhism, and also in voices and this psychic phenomenon of voice hearing. Benny is traumatized by the death of his father, Kenji, and shortly after that, he starts to hear voices. The first voice he hears is his father's voice calling his name at the crematorium. Now, my dad died in 1998, and for about a year after his death, just like Benny, I used to hear his voice calling my name. I'd be doing something completely ordinary and mundane, like washing the dishes or folding the laundry, and I'd hear him behind me, and it was always right here on the right hand side, right? And I'd hear him clear his throat. He had a very distinctive way of clearing his throat, and then he would say my name, Ruth. Right? And I, of course, turn around and look, and he wouldn't be there, and then I would remember, oh, right, he's dead. And every time this happened, I would feel that sort of shock, right? That sudden kind of punch of sadness and grief all over again. And this happened maybe 5 or 6 times during the course of a year. But after about a year, I stopped hearing his voice and life went on. And I'd never really thought much about it. I kind of forgot about it. But the experience did stay with me. And when I started writing this book, I remembered and I shared it with Benny. And it became one of the seeds of the novel. So Benny also stops hearing his dad's voice, but then other voices start to speak to him. Voices belonging to all sorts of random things in the house, like Christmas ornaments and shoes and bits of wilted lettuce. Benny's mother, Annabelle, works from home. We all know what this is like. And in order to cope with her own grief, she indulges in retail therapy and develops a hoarding problem. So their house is chaotic. It's filled with things that won't shut up. The voices follow Benny to school, where he gets into trouble and eventually ends up on a pediatric psych ward. When the psychiatrist learns he's hearing voices, he's diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and is put on medications that make his problems worse. The voices, he's told, are just in his head. After he's discharged, he decides that school is no longer an option and he takes refuge at a large public library. Now, libraries, as we know, are places that are filled with speaking things, right? Objects speak. Books speak to us. But at the library, all of the speaking things are orderly, right? All of the books are lined up neatly on their shelves, and they speak in their quietest library voices. So Benny finds the library a very soothing place to be. And at the library, Benny meets this odd community of library people. He meets a beautiful young conceptual artist with a transgender ferret, and he falls in love with her. He meets a homeless Slovenian poet-philosopher named Slavoj, who holds literary salons in the men's washroom. Slavoj is the one who encourages Benny to listen to his voices and to identify his philosophical question, what is real? Benny also meets a children's librarian who's a bit of a superhero because all librarians are superheroes. And he also discovers a place in the basement, an abandoned bindery in the basement of this library. And it's a very powerful place where all phenomena exist in an unbound state, right? And it's here in the bindery where he meets a very special talking object, his very own book, who starts narrating his life. So, just to clarify, the Book of Form and Emptiness is Benny's book, right? And the Book of Form and Emptiness is also the narrator of the Book of Form and Emptiness. The novel emerges as a dialogue between Benny and his book. The book is telling us Benny's story, but from time to time, Benny interrupts to object or to clarify or to offer a correction. So Benny and the book are engaged in an intimate act of mutual co-creation, right? And it's through this dialogue, this interdependent relationship that they form, that they are quite literally speaking each other into existence. right? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg conundrum. Which comes first, the book or the boy? So, the book is a talking thing, and as a talking thing, an object that speaks, the book confirms Benny's basic sanity. How? Well, if we're reading the book, it's turned us all into voice hearers too, right? The book is narrating the story to us, and if we're reading the book, or in my case, when I'm writing the book, we're hearing this object speaking to us, at least metaphorically. Many of the people in Benny's life, his classmates and teachers and his psychiatrist, all think that because he hears the voices of things speaking, that he's crazy, right? But is he? And if he is, then to some degree, aren't we all? In the Book of Form and Emptiness, I wanted to explore the distinction we make between what we call creativity and what we call madness. I wanted to think collectively about how we as a society understand or fail to understand perplexing and unshared mental states. Like Benny, when I was his age, I had all sorts of emotional and mental health challenges too. And when I was in high school, I also spent time on a locked psych ward and was also medicated. So this was another experience that I was able to share with Benny. Like many artists and writers, I've struggled with anxiety and depression all my life. And the thing that has saved me has been books. First reading them and then later writing them. After the publication of my last book, A Tale for the Time Being, I was giving a talk at a public library in Ann Arbor. And I was talking about how novels come to me as voices. And a man in the audience raised his hand and he asked me what I meant by that. Did I really hear the voices of my characters as if with my ears, as if they were outside me? Or was I speaking more metaphorically? And then he went on to explain that his son heard voices that were very disturbing and disruptive to both the boy and his father. And the father wanted to know if I was a voice hearer too. And if so, how did I cope with this? Were my voices as disturbing to me as his sons were to him? And so we had a conversation, and I told him about hearing my dad's voice as if with my ears, as if it were outside me. But I said that my novelistic voices are more internal. They're more like thoughts, but they're different from thoughts as well. I still hear them, but I hear them inside as if I'm hearing them with my mind. But this father's question stayed with me, and it got me thinking about these perplexing states of mind and these unshared experiences. I mean, obviously, the experience of voice hearing means a vastly different thing in different cultures and in different societies and contexts. In many cultures, voice hearers are, revered as holy. They're shamans, they're healers. They can hear what others can't. History is full of ancient oracles, prophecies, as is the Bible. Joan of Arc heard voices. Mahatma Gandhi heard voices. And ironically, so did Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, the fathers of modern psychology. And I suspect that if Jung were alive today and told a clinical psychiatrist about his voices and visions, and insisting that he could control them, which is what Jung felt, that he would be diagnosed with a schizoaffective disorder as well. So I started thinking about these different kinds of unshared experiences and how our present day culture, how they seem to exist on a kind of spectrum. All right, there are the voices that we think of as creative inspiration. The voice of the muse. The internal music that composers hear, or the visions that painters see, and certainly the voices of characters and books. As a novelist, I make my living from these voices, and I'm lucky enough to live in a culture where this kind of voice hearing is acceptable, and it's even rewarded sometimes, and at least for now. Right. I can easily imagine a society where this is not the case. I can imagine a society where books are banned. Right. I can imagine a society where writers like me are punished for their visions and for making things up. And readers like you are persecuted for reading our books. It doesn't require a whole lot of imagination these days. But thankfully, we're not there yet. And for now, anyway, the muses are safe. And they occupy sort of one end of the voice hearing spectrum. And then somewhere in the middle of the spectrum are those horrible, kind of neurotic, self-disparaging voices of the inner critic and the inner judge. You probably know what I mean. Uh, Most of us hear them. Mine are yammering away at me all the time, telling me that whatever it is that I'm writing is terrible, that I'm just wasting my time, that I should give it up and get a real job, that I should do something useful. Um, these voices of, the inner critic are unpleasant, and they're always lurking inside. I can't always control them, but after years of psychotherapy, we've worked out a truce of sorts, and they generally let me get on with my work. And then at the far end of the spectrum are people like the boy in Ann Arbor whose voices won't stay inside and refuse to negotiate. His voices abuse and harass them and are a source of torment and suffering, and so they seek medical help. And in our biomedically oriented culture, help often takes the form of a psychiatric diagnosis like schizophrenia or psychosis, and then all of the incumbent psychopharmaceutical interventions, which sometimes do help, sometimes are very helpful, but other times can cause harm. Thankfully, there are a lot of other effective modalities for treating and supporting voice hearers. And in doing the research for this book, which was really fascinating, I spoke to doctors and I spoke to voice hearers and I spoke to doctors who are voice hearers. I spoke to artists and mad activists in the voice hearing community and learned about effective non-pathologizing approaches to these kinds of perplexing states and unshared experiences that are being pioneered by groups like Intervoice, the International Hearing Voices Network, and Hearing Voices USA. There are many affiliated groups, and they're run by people with lived experience who are working in a peer-to-peer support modality. One of my voice hearing friends wanted me to say that it's not the case that the voices people hear inevitably cause suffering. Some voice hearers happily coexist with their voices and are even helped by them. But if they disclose this fact to a medical professional, their voice hearing experience will most likely be reduced to a symptom. She also wanted me to say that it's important to note that there are no biomarkers, no blood tests for voice hearing, right? Or for psychosis, or for neurosis, or for creativity, for that matter. It's not like cancer, where you can biopsy a tissue or do a CT scan and say, yes, this person has lymphoma. The diagnosis of mental illness relies on a clinician's subjective assessments to determine which, amongst an array of unshared experiences, should be diagnosed as pathological. So this raises the question, right? Which are pathological and which are normal? What is normal anyway, right? And who gets to decide this? I mean, it's not normal to write novels, although some of us still do it. I think it's important to remember that normal is a cultural construct, right? We made it up. It's a fiction, right? And since we made it up, why can't we change it? Why can't we expand the concept of normal and make it less exclusionary? Make it more generous and compassionate and inclusive. So these are the kinds of questions that the book of Form and Emptiness is asking us to think about. And since its publication, I've heard from many readers who have told me about their own voice hearing experiences, which really supports what the voice hearing community asserts, that voice hearing is a lot more common and therefore a lot more normal than most people think. So, Benny hears the voices of things, right? Like sneakers and pencils and baseball bats speaking to him. And he's besieged by the stories that objects seem to want to tell. His mother, Annabelle, for his mother, Annabelle, things are also deeply meaningful. She can't bear to get rid of her dead husband's shirts because they're imbued with such a strong aura, kind of living sense of him. His smell, her memories, their love for each other cling to the fabric. She collects things, she hoards things, and is comforted by them. She can't throw anything away. And I get this. I have these tendencies too. I learned them from my parents who never threw anything away. They were born in 1914, and they were children during the Great Depression. Um, they weren't hoarders, but they were extremely frugal and they saved everything. Every piece of tinfoil, every piece of plastic wrap had to be washed and dried and folded up for reuse. Right. They saved rubber bands, they saved pieces of strings and paper bags and plastic bags. And when they died, I had to clean out their house. Now, this was an enormous undertaking, and as an only child, this task fell to me. My parents were both scholars, they were both serious readers, and so there were shelves and shelves and shelves of books. My mother saved all of my homework and report cards going back to pre-kindergarten. Okay. One of the earliest report cards said, "Ruthie is a very helpful little girl. She likes to help the teacher pass out the cookies during snack time. But she must learn to share this fun job with other children." I couldn't believe it when I found this. I must have been such an obsequious little teacher's pet, such a good girl, such a good girl. It's embarrassing and it's a little sad too. My father was a linguist. He worked to preserve endangered Indigenous and First Nations languages, and he had received many gifts from his friends in these communities. So I would find these beautiful things, woven baskets and ceramic bowls and masks and carvings packed away in boxes, and I had no idea what they were or where they came from or what to do with them. My Japanese mother had inherited all of her parents' things, and so there were scrolls and dolls and woodblock prints and pottery and prayer beads and thousands of photographs that my grandfather had taken. He was the first official photographer for Volcanoes National Park in Hawaii before he was arrested and interned after Pearl Harbor. And so I grew up with these things, and I remember how special they seemed. And there was this one box in particular that I treasured. It was filled with these beautiful slices of polished rock, agate and malachite and geodes, and they were mounted on small pieces of cardboard. And my mother told me that my grandfather had cut and polished these stones. And when I was little, I remember I thought that they were precious gems. And I remember feeling very, very rich. Later, when I was older, my mother told me the story of these polished stones. She said that my grandfather had collected them in the desert of New Mexico when he was imprisoned in a Justice Department prisoner of war camp in Santa Fe during World War II. They must have had a lapidary factory at the prison camp where prisoners cut and polished stones for the tourist trade. So the stones in my box were the ones that my grandfather had brought back with him when he was released after the war. And so the story of my grandfather's box of stones was one that I knew, right? Eventually I learned and I knew, at least in part. But as I was cleaning out the house, I realized that all of the objects in the house had stories too. Only their stories were unknowable because my parents were dead. And I remember thinking at that time, if only these things could speak, right? But of course they couldn't, or I didn't know how to listen. And there was this one little box that I found in my mother's study. It was small. It was about this size. Okay. And my mother had very carefully labeled the box on the outside with a magic marker, both in English and in Japanese. Okay. In English, horizontally, she'd written empty box. And in Japanese, vertically, she'd written karabako, which is empty box in Japanese, right? She wanted to make absolutely sure that there was no mistake, right? And so this was the last straw, right? I'd been cleaning and sorting and discarding for weeks, right? And I remember sitting on the floor and just staring at this box, thinking, seriously, Mom? Like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? I couldn't bear to throw it away because it was so quintessentially mom, but at the same time, I couldn't use it for anything. I couldn't put anything inside the box because that would turn it into exactly what it wasn't, right? It was an empty box, right? Perfectly useless. So, of course, it had to stay that way. And I took it home and I put it on my Zen altar where it sits today, still empty. So, this brings us finally back to this question of emptiness and the title of the novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness. The title comes from a key line in one of the the central Mahayana Buddhist texts, the Great Perfect Wisdom Heart Sutra. And the line goes like this: form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. Form itself is emptiness. Emptiness itself form. So the word emptiness is problematic in English. The Sanskrit word is shunyata, which is usually translated into English as emptiness or vacuity or hollowness or voidness, right? They're all words with a very negative connotation, right? In Japanese, the word is translated, the character that's used is the character ku, which is the same character that's used for sky, right? And somehow that seems less empty, right, than the word emptiness. This negative connotation is misleading because shunyata is really more like the opposite of empty, right? Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, is a description of reality as an all-inclusive oneness, right? A flux that contains everything, all of the myriad things of the world, coming and going, dying and being born. So form is emptiness, emptiness is form is a way of talking about interdependence, right? It's a way of describing the fact that all phenomena, objects or beings or selves even, which appear to be separate entities, are actually a kind of sensory cognitive illusion, right? Separation, in other words, is an illusion. And the truth is that all phenomena exist and co-arise in a radically interdependent relationship with everything else. You could even say that the notion of a fixed individual self, right, a me and a you, is a hallucination, one that we all share. And so this brings us to, ready, the third of the three marks of existence. This is the truth of no self or not self, right? So form, emptiness, no self. These ideas are, they're all pretty abstract, so it might help to use a metaphor here. Imagine emptiness as a vast ocean, okay? Got that in your head? This vast ocean of emptiness. It's so vast that it has no shores and no horizon. It just stretches out forever. And as the planet turns and the tide pulls and the wind blows and the moon waxes, all of these different conditions start to act upon this ocean of emptiness. And this causes a little wave to start to form, right? And this little wave gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And pokes its head up and looks around, right? He's wearing his little white hat, you know? And he looks around and it's astonished, right? Look at me. I'm a wave. I'm a thing, right? I'm taller and bigger and more important than all of this emptiness around me. I'm really something, okay? And the little wave rolls along like that for a while, picking up speed and feeling pretty great about itself. But then the planet turns and the tides tug and the moon wanes and the winds die down and the little wave starts to sink back down. And it's like, no. But before you know it, it's part of the infinite ocean of emptiness again. And this is just like us, right? Just like all things, like sneakers and baseball bats and bits of wilted lettuce. All phenomena coexisting in this dynamic and intimate and dialogic relationship, co-arising and co-creating each other. The wave is the ocean is the wave. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So, which comes first, the book or the boy? Well, neither, and both. because there is no independent entity, there is no single self. There's only this eternal and mutually co-creating relationship. And yet, a book must start somewhere. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So much for a fantastic talk, and we have time for some questions.
Great.
And I'll come around with the mic.
Somebody in the back.
Hi, Ruth. Again, thank you so much for that. I would like to challenge you a little bit
Please.
because my personal view on emptiness and form is sort of that emptiness is sort of the beginning, or rather before the beginning, kind of like our universe, I guess, as we've come to know it. And then after the Big Bang happened, apparently a bunch of molecules came about and created form. So why are they sort of connected at the same point in time instead of like one after the other?
Oh, rather than sequentially.
Yes.
Right. I see. Well, I think that that's a question of how you're thinking of time. You're thinking of time in a very linear way here. So if you think of time using a different kind of temporal model, is it linear, or is it simultaneous, or is it synchronous? Is it synchronous, or is it diachronic? Right. So I think that is actually, the model of time that you're using is one model of time, but there are other models of time as well. Right. Yeah. Oh, what might you? Well, for that you have to read A Tale for the Time Being, because that's what that book is all about. That book is an exploration of exactly that question. What is time? What is time, and how do we think of it, and how has it been thought of, at different points, in history and in different cultures and everything else, right? The Buddhist way of thinking of time is very different. The way we visualize time is fascinating. We, for example, we are so locked into linear temporal models, right? And we think of, but when you think of it, right, we talk about the past as though it exists, right? But where is it? Is it back here? And where's the future? Is it out there somewhere? Like, how strange is that? And there are cultures that don't think of time that way at all. Other cultures think of the past as something out here because you can see it, because it's knowable, right? Whereas the future is unknowable, so it's back there, right? And that makes perfect sense too. So it's interesting. It's an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a two-part question. Maybe one will inform the other. I'm curious about how your practice of Zen Buddhism affects your writing. And also, I was just curious about anything you could say about the backstory behind The Tale of a Table Leg, because that was crushing to read, and I was shocked at where it went.
Yeah, I absolutely have no recollection where that story came from. Sometimes stories are like that. I think I was, I know that, when I was writing that, I was, sort of putting myself in that staff room in the basement of the library, and there was this table there that was really kind of out of place because it was a farm table in this otherwise, kind of renovated, library. And I just felt that farm table had stories, and then that was a story that emerged. Now, I don't know where that came from, other than, it just kind of happened. And this is actually quite related to the practice of Buddhism, in the sense that, my Zen practice, I think, informs the writing in more ways than I can even begin to enumerate. But one thing that I think is important here is, and the table leg kind of illustrates, is that it has, after you meditate for long periods of time, and the type of meditation that we do in the school of Zen that I practice, which is Soto Zen, is a kind of open, objectless meditation, right? And so we're not focused on a mantra or on an image or, when you're starting, you can focus on the breath because that gives you an object, gives you something to hold on to. But at some point, you let go of the focus of the breath as well. And it creates it allows you to kind of rest in a state of openness where you are, you're hearing everything, you're smelling, all of your sense gates are open, right? Including the sense gate of your mind. Okay. That's the other thing is that in Buddhism, in our culture here, we think of having five senses, right? And whereas in Buddhism, there's six senses, and the sixth sense gate, like the eyes or the ears or the nose or the mouth, right? The sense gates. The sixth sense gate is the mind. And the sensations that the mind perceives, right, are thoughts and feelings, right? And so to be able to kind of rest in an open and receptive state with all of your sense gates open, including the sense gate of your mind, right, is a very useful thing for a writer because, and I think this is, I think this really is related to what Jung called, I think it was active imagination. I think that's right. If there's any psychology professors or students in the room, maybe you could tell me. But the cultivation of a kind of an open state where you are receptive to, and Jung would have said the unconscious, right? And I think that's probably, where the table leg story came from, right? I can't trace it consciously. I can't give you a kind of, the story of, the real life story, story that it came from. But it just, it arose, right? And so that's the ability to kind of be in a state of not knowing, is really important for writers. This is what Keats talked about when he talked about negative capability, right? And so the capability, the capacity to sit in a state of not knowing, right? And for a novelist who spends 8, 9, 10 years writing a book, you really you really have to cultivate that state of not knowing. You have to be okay hanging out there, right? And it's hard because, of course, we all want to know, right? We all are desperate to know. But I think it's exactly that. It's, on one hand, we really want to know stuff, right? And on the other hand, we don't know, right? And so there's a kind of tension between those two states of mind, right? The wanting to know and the I don't know, right? And that tension, I think, is where creativity happens. I think that, it's a generative tension. And so that if you can tolerate sitting in that state of tension, right, then you can start to create things. Right? And that's something else that meditation is really useful for, because you get really impatient when you're meditating. And so then you have to sit with that impatience, right? Because you really just want the bell to ring so that you can get up and stretch your legs, but you can't. So you sit there in that state of tension, and you become intimate with it. You become friendly with it, and then you can drop that too, right? So yeah.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
I'm Alex.
Hi, Alex.
Earlier you mentioned your process journal, and I'd love to hear a little more about that. Whatever you want to share. I can be more specific if you'd like, but I'm open to
Let me start, and then you can ask me more
Sure.
questions. And thank you for picking up on that. You notice how I carefully seeded that? I did. That was a client, right? No, it's a plant because I think it's super useful, and I am imagining that a group of people who come to a lecture about storytelling, there are probably a few writers in the audience, right? So this is something I do like to share. I have kept a journal in which I write about my writing process. All right. Now, other bits of information, other bits of things, stories, and stuff like that sneak in, but it's primarily a journal um, where I write about what it is that I'm writing. Right. So it's a kind of metacognitive exercise, and I keep mine on my computer. Right. So it's available to me because I also write on the computer. So it's available to me whenever I'm writing. Um, I use the process journal as a capturing a place to kind of capture ideas, as a place to work through problems that I'm having. I give myself homework assignments. I give myself research. You know, all my research questions kind of start there anyway. Um, I use it as a place to vent and complain about all of the things in the world that are impacting my writing and really making me angry. Or all of the ways that the story is just not doing what I want it to do. Um, the most important thing I think is I ask questions. What I've discovered over the years is that the process journal is actually it's like a friend. It's like having it's like having a writing friend who is always willing to listen to you, right? Who never gets bored or annoyed at you for, going on and on and on about your writing ideas, right? Who's always there, who's always supportive, and always available, right? And so very often I'll ask the process journal questions, like if I'm having problems with a character, not knowing what the character's motivation is, or not knowing what the character would do. I kind of work out. I'll ask questions like, would she do this? Would she do this? Maybe she'd do this. What do you think about this? And just start asking questions. And most of the time, the answers will come, right? Because somehow, in the act of asking those questions, opening up those fields of possibility, it's just brainstorming. It's a brainstorming technique. But opening up those fields of possibility, you'll light upon one of them that you look at it and it has energy, right? It has, oh, there's something there. And then you know where to follow, you know where to put your attention. And so I've been keeping this for some reason. I don't even know why I started doing this, but back when I was writing my first novel, and I've kept, so that was like 1997 or something. And I have a journal, that it changes over time, but I have a kind of document like that of my work right from the very beginning. And the other thing is that it's motivating. Okay, so sometimes I get very motivated by things like page counts, right? Like sometimes that's like really exciting, or word counts, right? So when I'm in that kind of mood where I'm motivated by tracking my word counts, I'll make notes of those, right? Other times, page counts and word counts are the last thing that I want to track because it's just too discouraging, right? And so then I stop, right? So the process journal, it has to be, sort of reactive in that way. It has to sort of meet my needs. Um, that's one another thing. And then there was something else I was going to say. Oh gosh, I forgot. Um, yeah. Anyway, maybe it'll come to me. But it's this kind of process, right? Um, that's right. Was that when I start writing at the beginning of a writing session, I start with the process journal, right? And I'm able to look at the process journal and remember what headspace I was in when I last was writing. And, when I'm writing every day, this isn't a problem, because I can usually track my writing head from day to day. But, you know, when I'm teaching, for example, there might be several days between writing sessions, and I won't remember what I was thinking 3 days ago, you know, or a week ago. So the process journal helps me with that. So I start a writing session looking at the process journal and kind of checking back, even looking back, you know, like a couple of weeks, just to kind of get a sense of the trajectory that I was on. And then I end every session with a little kind of report on how it went. And then any questions, you know, what do I need to do next? What's my next step? And that way, when I sit down to write, I'm never just sitting there staring at a blank page, because that is what you want to avoid, you know, at all costs. So, you know, having that little bit of an assignment, you know, giving yourself kind of little assignments and goals to, you know, or things to research or things to think about. I think that just the act of asking a question, very often I'll write a question in my process journal at the end of the day, and I'll go to sleep and I'll wake up with the answer, right? Because, you know, that's how minds work, right? There are actually reasons why that happens, but yeah. So that's what it is. Did I answer you? Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for an amazing talk. I hope you all will stay for fruit and cupcakes, and Professor Ozeki will be available at the table at the back of the room to sign books.
Good.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody.